If you're seeing this right now and are thinking, wow, it's a really well-reviewed game, it must be really good, then I envy your position, because unlike me and many others, you don't remember the days when this was overwhelmingly positive. This is Risk of Rain 2, a third-person roguelite originally developed by an indie studio called Hopu Games, but is now owned by Gearbox Software, the developers for good old Borderlands. It's one of the most popular roguelites ever made, and arguably one of the best ones too. It struck an incredible balance between skill and luck that was lacking in a lot of the games in this genre. And when you add an extremely satisfying combat system along with a heavenly defying soundtrack, then I think you'd understand why it's up there at the top of everyone's list of roguelites. This was a game that was loved by many, and you can still see that to this day with how active the community is and how many players are still playing this game on a daily basis. This game is so celebrated that whenever a new big update comes along, no matter how old of a player you might be, you're still going to come back to this game no matter what. So when the second DLC of the game was announced, people were hyped. Skeptical, of course, because of the change in studios, but still excited nonetheless. That hype translated into statistics because the day that Seekers of the Storm came out, Risk of Rain 2 hit its peak players of all time. But the irony there is that that's not a good thing, because Seekers of the Storm is what shattered the legacy of Risk of Rain 2. Seekers of the Storm is a mess. That sentence in and of itself is an understatement. It was broken, overpriced, and unfinished. It was $15 on release, but it felt like it had the same amount of content as the previous DLC, which was half that price. So, to remedy the situation, they decide to change the game to be closer to the older DLC's price. But in order to reimburse the people who have already bought the game at full price, people had to refund the DLC and buy it again. I can't even imagine how embarrassing it must feel to tell your dedicated fanbase to refund your own game to make it feel like you're not scamming them. And the funniest thing of all is that this is probably the simplest of the issues. The code was broken, like so many things didn't work anymore that modders started working on a down patch instead of an unofficial one. Some characters were unplayable, the new items led to soft locks, 2 out of the 3 new characters were really unfinished, the boss fight looked like a modded game, and this was just the tip of the iceberg. And note that this was probably not the developer's fault. This is likely a product of a publisher rushing an unfinished mess with a group of devs that weren't really too familiar with the game's gameplay loop at the time. Because you have to remember that this isn't Hopu anymore, this is Gearbox Software. Although this brought chaos onto the community, what was more felt was the sadness that something really special to them was being destroyed in front of their eyes, and there wasn't much they could do about it other than voice their frustrations. But luckily for them, their voices were heard. Time skipped to now, and I'd say that the future of the game looks brighter than it did during Seekers of the Storm's release, but the havoc that it brought with it has already done its deed and damaged Risk of Rain 2's legacy. Some people might say that I'm being a bit too harsh with this sentiment since there have been worse crash outs in the past, that the future of Risk of Rain 2 is at least a bit brighter now, but to me, even if Gearbox releases banger after banger from this day on, the taint will still remain and never disappear. No Man's Sky is now a game mostly celebrated as one of the few exceptions of games coming back from the grave. But no matter how big of a comeback they make, the truth will still remain that it was an extremely big scam on release. It was inexcusable that it was released in that state, with majority of its promised features missing. And don't get me wrong, I love No Man's Sky. I've almost 100%ed the game too, and I would have already done so if I just had a better PC. I think it's an amazing game now, and this is coming from a guy that doesn't even like that much sci-fi stuff. So this is a pretty big deal for me. But no matter how good it is now, it's never going to erase what it did in the past. I will not judge it based on said past, but I will always take note of it moving forward. I think that knowledge is still necessary to appreciate the hard work that Hello Games put into the game to make it worthy again, and that's what I mean by having a tainted legacy. When talking about Risk of Rain 2, the topic of Seekers of the Storm will always come up. Much like how these interviews and promises still hold on to No Man's Sky like shackles, this will always be a shadow that looms over the game. But how much the players will overlook that shadow moving on is highly dependent on the quality of Phase 2 and 3 of the updates. If Risk of Rain 2 pulls a No Man's Sky and recovers from this, then its legacy might be tainted, but the comeback will still be heralded as the power of overcoming its adversity with the help of the community. But if it sucks, then we'll all have to just collectively downpatch the game from now on. Thanks for watching. See ya.